Labor is still holding on to huge public support while National is languishing, according to the latest One News Colmar-Brunton poll. Tonight's poll puts Labor at 53%, National at 25%, ACT at 8% and the Green Party also on 8%. New Zealand First are still registering 2% in support and the Maori Party also gets 2%. As for preferred Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern is out in front on 58%, while Judith Collins is on 12%. David Seymour sits at 4% and Christopher Luxon makes an appearance on 2%. To help us decipher all of this, our Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch joins me now. Craig, what does this mean? No buyer's remorse as yet from voters, it would appear.
Yes, good evening, Lisa. It does not look that way at all. A pretty ho-hum result here on the first poll of the 2020 term. Labor, of course, they came in on a high into this term. They had a stonking great election victory. They had 50% a majority government. This puts them even above that on 53%. They won't have any complaints about this at all. In some ways, it's surprising given that they came in to this term and very quickly ran up against a housing crisis. There's been a huge number of headlines, a huge amount of focus on this issue of housing and house prices skyrocketing. And there was some suggestion, well, it definitely looked like it anyway, that the government was caught off guard by it, that they didn't really know how to respond, that they were somewhat flat-footed. They'll be very pleased with this result, that it does not seem to be getting, that issue does not seem to be getting too much cut through, that it doesn't seem to be hurting them yet. Of course, Jacinda Ardern said that she would be a Prime Minister who governs for all New Zealanders, and I guess that's homeowners and non-homeowners alike. So nothing bad in this result for the Labour Party.
So then what have they arguably done to deserve the bump in numbers? Is it just keeping their heads down and not doing anything to annoy anyone before Christmas?
Well, I guess there was the big portfolio rollout. We saw the ministers appointed new faces and new jobs, although I think it's questionable probably how much that goes through into voters' minds and how much they take that into account. I think they probably look instead for mistakes and fumbles, and that's where that begins to have some effect on the polls. We haven't seen any mistakes or fumbles as yet, and so that's probably why it hasn't flowed through. Keeping an eye too on the legislation, which probably has more of an impact. There have been some big changes that they've made straight away. There were the tax changes in terms of the top tax rate. They declared the climate emergency. There was the doubling of sick leave, and then more recently the pill testing, making that completely legal in festivals for the upcoming summer period. So they have been hitting the ground running. They have made some changes over the last week, and perhaps the voters are looking at that and saying, that's what we elected you to do, now you're doing it.
Well, let's look at the other side of the house then in National. So 25%, right, which is round about what they got actually in what is arguably the poll that matters, election day, 25.6%. So stuck there, it appears, in a rut. How long will MPs and party faith be happy with that?
Well, the contrast is incredibly stark, isn't it? It's National. They had their shocker result on election night. They came in there at, around that 25.6% mark. Judith Collins kept her job. On results like this, if there's not much change, that becomes more and more tenuous. Of course, her saving grace is that there's no one in the party right now who wants it right now. And although this poll probably isn't going to change anything there, there's big question marks as there's more polls to come next year and the year after. Perhaps this poll isn't the straw that breaks the camel's back, but those ones to come, if Judith Collins doesn't make any difference there in terms of bringing that poll up, bringing National back and putting National back in a position where it might have a shot at power, she's going to be in real trouble. Another big sign for her, you mentioned it before, a big worrying sign for her is the preferred Prime Minister number. She actually fell in this result tonight, just down on 12%. And the appearance of Christopher Luxon in that result too, also curious. Him popping up there at 2%. She'll be keeping a close eye on him. And people in that caucus, MPs in that caucus, will be thinking, and the wider party too, as the time goes on, if that poll number doesn't change, not just the preferred Prime Minister, but that solid number, the party vote, if that doesn't change, people will, more and more attention will start to shift away from Judith Collins and on to Christopher Luxon.
So the Greens holding steady at 8%. They'll be happy with that, won't they? Because they've come in and they're carving some space for themselves. Even though they've done a deal with Labor, they seem not to, have lost any of the faithful as a consequence.
Yes, there were some question marks. Some people in the Green Party, supporters, activists, were quite concerned about the fact that they signed up to this cooperation agreement with Labour, despite the fact that they have no real influence, no real power, just because of how the numbers have fallen. Yet they signed up to the cooperation agreement nonetheless, and it does not seem to have been a muzzle on them. It does not seem to have held them back from speaking their mind, as some of those activists were concerned it was. They've spoken out on tax, they've spoken out on housing, they continue to go on about this, their calls for a capital gains tax, for a wealth tax. So they definitely are differentiating themselves, and there's a lot of potential there, I think, particularly as Labour tax back to the centre, as they move back and try and consolidate and hold on to this massive 50% result, the 50% that they got on election night. 53 is where they're at now. And as they continue to do that, there's probably some space opening up on the left where the Greens can capitalise and monopolise on that and maybe even grow their vote.
Thanks, Craig. That's Craig McCulloch, our deputy political reporter there. And that's the first poll post-election. Labour on 53%, National on 25%, Greens and ACT holding steady on 8%.